not only experiencing poverty, but also being in an area that other people are experiencing poverty has more or less the same. So this is, again, showing the connection between trust and living in poor neighborhoods. So if you have a whole bunch of people around you that are struggling with poverty, even if you yourself are not necessarily poor, has pretty much the same effect, because that is telling you that this thing can happen to you. So the horizon is not as clear and as bright as it should be. And again, this is something that happens for immigrants and non-immigrants. And I want to emphasize that because these things are not sort of unique things that have happened to immigrants. These are sort of the universal things that happen to all human beings. So it's not necessarily something exceptional about immigrants that you have to start looking for special explanations. So these are the general trends that are basically talking about the whole immigrant population. As I mentioned, I wanted to, in my recent study, I have tried to focus on specific groups, and to start, I have basically begun with the group that I'm more familiar with, and is the Middle Eastern and the Muslim immigrants, because for a couple of different reasons. One was, of course, my familiarity with these immigrants. The other one was that it seems that Muslim immigrants have a particularly unique type of experience that they're going through in almost all immigrant decisions. So there's something different about it, and people have speculated about what is different about the immigrants, the Muslim immigrants, or Middle Eastern immigrants. Some have suggested that it might be their religion, it might be the cultural background, it might be the type of personality, the features that they have that creates a different path. So I want to argue through, and I hope my findings will support and will show that that is not necessarily true. It is not something unique about them. It is something unique about what they experience here, but the reasons behind those experiences are not necessarily good. So let me start with just showing you a couple of, perhaps what one of my colleagues said, very disturbing and depressing piece of information. Trust in general pop. Muslim immigrants, Muslim/Middle Eastern immigrants, I use that because in some of the data sets that I have used, it is specifically talking about Muslims, in some others it's not that I have to use Middle Eastern background as sort of a proxy for Muslims. One of the lowest levels of trust that is there reported by Muslims. And this is one of the better graphs. There are so many other different data sets that I have used, and in all of them, Muslim immigrants ended up being either the last group or one but last. And the last group was always the Jehovah's Witnesses. So there is something that Muslims have to be grateful for Jehovah's Witnesses. The next one, trust in neighbors. Pretty much the same kind of story, the lowest level of trust as been reported by Muslim immigrants. I just talk very briefly about a couple of other things that are not directly related to trust, but they are showing the other sort of aspects of the attachment. In Canada, this is the life satisfaction, one of the lowest reported by them again. This is the rate of participation in voting, in political activities, the lowest by Muslims. Feeling out of place as a result of their skin color or their language or their ethnic background. Again, Muslims and Hindus are the two lowest groups. And so this is basically the overall picture. The economic factors have very serious implications for the type of mental approach or emotional approach that immigrants develop towards the larger society, how strongly they feel attached to this broader society, and how welcoming they find this broader society or this new society. And then in the case of Muslim and Middle Eastern immigrants, we see that their indicators of attachment to Canada are showing some signs of being sort of on the alarming side. It seems that there is something to worry about. But what it is that you have to worry about, what it is that you have to fix in order to change this situation. I want to argue that none of those cultural explanations, none of the political explanations are really adequate, or at least they are not, we have other things that are there and are much more visible, much more powerful that you have to worry about before you can get to those secondary set of factors. This is the so-called human capital profile of Muslim immigrants compared to the Canadian population, mainstream native-born Canadians, and also other immigrants. What you see here is that Muslim and or Middle Eastern immigrants on the left, they have the highest rate or the highest percentage among all these groups that have a knowledge of both English and French. And the one on the right-hand side, they have the group that has reported the highest frequency or the highest percentage of having bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and doctorate degrees. So basically in all these categories of higher education, they are doing much better than the rest of immigrants and also the Canadian mainstream population. Then when we switch to the employment or economic side of the story, we see almost opposite of this. When it comes to paid work, the level of or the percentage of people who have been working in paid employment is the lowest for those. When we look at self-employment, the highest rate is reported for instance. And those of you who are in the field know better that to be involved in self-employment does not necessarily mean a good thing, because sometimes that is the result of the block mobility that is immigrants have experienced in other sectors, and they think that they don't have any place there, they don't have any future there, then they switch to self-employment so that they can be their own boss. And interestingly enough, a lot of these immigrants in other data sets, it is shown that a lot of Muslim immigrants get quickly into self-employment and get quickly out of it as well. And that shows that it's not an initial interest that they have in doing this kind of thing just because of the lack of opportunities in other areas. Employment status, how many of them have worked full-time job during the election the year before the census year, 2005, the lowest one again is reported for Muslim and Middle Eastern immigrants. Unemployment rate, the highest, part-time job, the highest. So it is quite consistent in terms of what we see here. The overall distribution of income and the presence of different groups in different income categories. Here you see that it is the only area in which immigrants are overrepresented. That means in the lower income groups. Average income, the same, and low income, that means living below poverty. The rate is quite alarming. It's close to 40% compared to about 20% and 12% for the other groups. So basically, putting these things together, it is telling me that there are some sort of structural economic factors at work, and before we can take care of those, we cannot really use all those simplistic or oversimplified cultural and political explanation in order to explain why this is happening to Muslims and Middle Eastern immigrants. Very quickly, this is a sort of a very general and broad view of how immigrants feel, all groups of immigrants. In Canada, and I have compared that with the kind of feelings that they have had back in their home countries. And it seems that if you see that this green zone is the good area, basically, that shows the groups that have had a much better and higher score in terms of trust, in terms of life satisfaction, all those different indicators, have better scores compared to the population of their home countries. So that means they have migrated for better lives and they have achieved. That's good. The worrisome part is that black circle at the top. So these are the ones that have come with the hopes of course, getting a better life, but they haven't got it. For whatever reason, they're not happier, they're not more trustful towards the population, so it seems that something has not worked with them. And it is interesting to see that the groups that are there, Swedes, or their Finns, or their Iranians, or if you make the circle the larger, Vietnamese, East Indian Egyptians will be also included. So, in the remaining, I suppose, 2 minutes that I have, the general findings that I can get out of these data is that, first one, is that the economic experiences of immigrants have very serious implications for how closely they feel attached to them. And this is not something that is only going to affect immigrants' lives. It is something that will affect the lives of the Canadians as well. So it is not something that we just put some effort into and said that I hope it works for immigrants. If not, then too bad they will have to suffer. It is not just immigrants that will suffer as a result. It's the whole society that will suffer because of the absence of those attachments. The next one, I want to emphasize that, and again, that is something that has been shown, has come up in the interviews that I had with immigrants and in the data that I worked with, that the first 3 to 5 years are very, very crucial. So that basically emphasizes or re-emphasizes the work that the community organizations are doing in delivering services to immigrants. Because whatever experiences they have at that time, it will allow them to develop some sort of framework, conceptual framework, some sort of perception that will stay with them. And regardless of what will happen later, they will always understand and make sense of those later experiences in the light of that initial framework. So whatever we can do to make this phase or this part of the experiences as pleasant and as successful as it should be, we are basically contributing to something that is much more long-term in nature. It's not just the 2-3 years that will be affected. The last point that I will just mention very quickly is that a lot of these immigrants have, in the interviews that they've had with them, have indicated that they think the government, the Canadian government, has been strongly and very heavily present in the process of their application, up to the point that they have applied their visas. Basically, they have been dealing with the Canadian government. At that point, then, it disappears from us. Basically, they don't see the Canadian government any longer. If they are lucky, they will find, of course, the community organization and they'll get some help from them. But they have this feeling that the Canadian government doesn't care about them after they arrive here. So that is the sort of perception, general perception that they have. And what that, the implication that has for their attachment is that they do not get attached to the Canadian society in general, even if they are successful. They get attached to these smaller communities that have provided them with the help. So that doesn't create a kind of universal attachment and sense of belonging that we are hoping to get as a result of the experiences. So even if the experiences are very positive, the loyalty that they develop is very local, because it's not for the general society. But I appreciate the fact that it's a much bigger topic to talk about, and I would hope that there will be other opportunities to discuss this. Thank you so much for your patience.